and we are live for episode 28 of Agencyphonics. I'm very excited today. I have a very special guest joining us. Before I introduce him, I just want to say we're back in the studio. We've had about 4 or 5 months of Zoom uploading and Skype and all types of live streaming with lag and technical problems, but I'm really delighted to be back in here. It's a little bit eerie being back inside offices where no one's working anymore. Everyone's remote, but we, as always, I want to thank Wild Hive because they donate their studio to us to do this. We are a social enterprise, not for profit, and we have Caitlin today being our producer, and we've managed to finally take our graduate who was working for us as a trainee and taken her on. She doesn't know this yet, but we're going to offer her a full-time job soon. So I thought I'd just say that live on air. I just hope she's going to take it now. No, so welcome, Caitlin. Thank you as well for being here today. So today's guest is Daniel Priestley. Now, those of you who know me well will know I've been banging on about his books relentlessly for pretty much the last 6 to 12 months now. Daniel started out as an entrepreneur at the age of 21. He built a multi-million pound event marketing and management business by the age of 25. A successful entrepreneur, international speaker, best-selling author, Daniel has built and sold businesses in Australia, which is actually when I first met him, which was we'd just come over from Australia. Yep. And I was out networking one night, bumped into him, and I remember this guy telling me this story. Turns out since then he's written a few books and become slightly famous. So Daniel's the founder of Dent, which runs 9-month growth accelerator program for small enterprises. I think many of you listening have been on some of his courses, and I've always heard great things about them, by the way, just to let you know. It looks after 500 entrepreneurs a year to help develop their businesses. You've got offices in States, Singapore, Australia, Canada as well?
Well, we've actually just gone back to, we've got London, Sydney and Toronto. With COVID, we've gone from a city model to a time zone model. So we actually, we run the EMEA time zone out of London, we run the APAC time zone out of Sydney, and the Americas out of Toronto. So it's kind of cool. We're actually 3 offices, not 7, which is great.
Amazing. And you've written 4 books since I last met you in that basement in the Adam Street Club, for those of you who used to go to Adam Street.
That was great times.
It was great times. And Key Person of Influence and Oversubscribed are the 2 books I've actually read. And then I'm going to get Daniel to talk about the other 2 books, which was Entrepreneur Revolution and 24 Assets, which I haven't read, so you can share that with me. But I think... thank you very much for giving up your time today.
It's so nice to actually see someone in person.
Yeah.
It's weird. Everything's on Zoom these days.
Yeah, I know. It has been weird. And actually, I got asked this week to do a couple of pieces of work in a couple months' time, and it involved a commute. And I was like, yeah. And then actually I sat there and thought, you know something? I've really enjoyed not commuting. I've had more time. I've been probably performing better.
Yeah.
I've been less tired. So actually, I think we've got to make sure we learn some of the lessons.
It's a little bit love-hate because, you sit at home and you do so many Zoom, but then when it comes time to go and travel to places, you think, oh, what's the point of doing that now? We can get just as much done on Zoom. So I'm still figuring out how I fit in this new forward. 2020s post-COVID world.
Yeah, we've run a few surveys in our community around what will people do with their offices and freelance. It's fascinating, actually. I think the main thing is that most people, I think, when they return to offices, from the data I've seen so far, says around half the people are going to kind of go back and let their team work some days and not others, and just do a combination. And then about a quarter, so about 50% are saying that. About 25-30% are saying 100% freelance.
Well, it's really tricky.
100% flexible.
It's tricky on the younger staff, I find, because the team who don't have a home office, it's fine for myself. I've got a home office and I've got a whole room in the house and plenty of capacity. But I've got people on my team who they share accommodation, and you can't have 4 people living and working together and all of that sort of stuff. The other thing too is the natural mentoring that happens around the office between people with different levels of experience. And I want to make sure that we replace that. We want to make those serendipitous, nice moments happen where someone who's junior in the company can learn from someone who's got a little bit more experience in a natural way.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really important part of One of the things that, having those graduates, those juniors coming through, how have we been coping with you, Caitlin? We've been a bit of a training social distance style on Zoom, but, I think you're right. How do you do that natural mentoring and that coaching? I think it's a really, really good point. So let me give you a little bit of backstory. So about 3 years ago, Pete and I, we go to South by Southwest every year, and I saw some incredible speakers. Gary V was one of them, who's a bit Marmite with our audiences. Some people love him, some people hate him. But Casey Neistat and some other kind of really high profile, Adam Grant, some really fantastic, wonderful speakers. But I noticed that all of them had incredibly, although it didn't look overly polished, but incredibly polished personal identities, personal brands. Everything about them looked to be really, really cleverly defined. And I then came back and I read an article this is 2017, that said 3 years from now, if you don't have a personal brand, no one will do business with you.
Yeah.
And I started myself. In fact, I met a guy who did LinkedIn training, and he said to me, I looked at your LinkedIn, Spencer, and I don't actually know what you do. He said, because all you do is you like other people's posts and you share them. And I realized that actually I knew all this stuff about, agencies. I'd seen so much. I had, Malcolm Gladwell's 20,000 hours, not 10,000 of growing agencies. And so he said, you've got to talk about that stuff. And Gary Vee had always said, talk about the process. Yep. And so my journey kind of began about 3 years ago. And then I came across your book, which was great because when I read it, I'd kind of done about 60%, but realized there was a lot of, great signposts in there of the things I wasn't doing. I learned so much from it. But then I learned that you wrote that book when?
I started writing it in 2009 and it came out in 2010.
Are you some kind of prophet or something?
Yeah, exactly. They're just Nostradamus of business. Well, it was an interesting time in my 20s. I was running an event marketing business event, kind of an agency that does very much a specialty around events and tours and road shows. And in that capacity, I was meeting with a lot of people who were best-selling authors. I was seeing people who were dragons on Dragon's Den, and we were promoting speakers up and down the east coast of Australia and then in the UK. And we were touring these speakers internationally. When I set up in London, we were bringing speakers from all over the world into London, international speakers, and we'd tour with them. So, a tour would be Manchester, Birmingham, Milton Keynes, London, and we'd do these road shows, and I would actually see what it was like for the Gary Vaynerchuks of the world and the best-selling authors and the Malcolm Gladwells and those kind of people. And what I noticed is that they were just a whirlwind of opportunity. The eye of the storm they were, and just these deals would come flooding in. When I say deals coming flooding in, quite literally people losing their minds, throwing business plans at them, saying, will you invest? Can I give you a share in my company? It was kind of like a mini Beatlemania around these people. Obviously, hundreds of people, not millions of people, but I found it almost that whereas most people are running around trying to chase opportunities, these people were trying to deflect them, and they were curating opportunities, and almost the best stuff would rise to the top. And it became just this self-fulfilling prophecy that because they're attracting talented people to their organization, they're attracting deals, and they're attracting attention, everything's happening at speed. So I'm standing behind the scenes as the marketing guy, filling the rooms and running the campaigns and doing the marketing and putting together the copy and the branding and all of those kind of things behind the scenes. And I'm watching this day after day after day for the best part of 10 years. And I just saw it early, and I saw, unless you're a key person of influence, you can't compete with these guys. These guys can do more in a week than you can do in a year because it all comes to them as opposed to chasing.
Yeah.
So that's when I started writing the book. And strangely, I should have seen it happening, but I was writing the book about being a key person of influence. And of course, when you write a book about being a key person of influence, suddenly everyone files the words key person of influence next to your name in their head. Yeah. So suddenly I got a bit of a brand as well.
Yeah, because it's funny because I always talk about personal branding and influencers, but actually now I call it key person of influence. So you kind of do force me to use your brand. Yeah. And what's interesting is that when you go back in business, I realized that in a way, this isn't new. If you go back into the 80s, there was this kind of romantic period, especially in the advertising and marketing world, where you had maybe in the 60s and 70s, you'd have the David Ogilvies, and then you'd have the Morris and Charles Saatchis. But you had these high-profile individuals who, were high profile,
personified the brand.
Yeah, but in the noughties, we kind of lost that. It feels like everyone's like hiding behind a brand.
It was that kind of rise of the company brand and kind of everyone trying to formalize the value of the business into the company brand. So the competitive advantage just reemerged, I think, where, here's some interesting stuff. You look at Richard Branson. He has something like, I think, 12.5 million followers on Twitter, but Virgin only has 240,000 followers. And Jessica Alba has 18.5 million people who follow her personal brand. And then her company, The Honest Company, has 1 million, just crossed the 1 million mark. And you can see this across the board. Elon Musk has 40 million followers and Tesla's got 5 million followers. So people massively, disproportionately want to follow that personal brand, the CEO, the founder, the thought leader. And it makes a lot of sense. Human brains are built for faces. They're built for voices and gestures and understanding micro expressions and, all of that, picking up on sarcasm and, we pick up on that
faceless
stuff.
I mean, I think you use the term faceless organizations, I think, in the book, and it's just, sometimes we feel like a frustration with a faceless organization. I've noticed that even my bank now, they've got the chief exec now sends the emails out, and suddenly his brand is sort of coming out and being used more, whereas I never used to see that.
There was this interesting turning point with Volkswagen when they had their scandal. And the first time you've ever seen the CEO, first time you've ever heard from the guy, he's cap in hand apologizing for something they've done wrong. But there's no brand equity in the guy. So there's nothing to trust. There's nothing to benchmark against. I'm only seeing him in a negative light.
Yeah.
And I think that was a bit of a wake-up call for CEOs where they sort of thought, look, how can I be called upon to represent the brand in the bad times if I've not built up any relationship with the marketplace?
Yeah, that's so true, isn't it? It's like, hi, the only time I'm speaking to everyone, it's bad news. And so actually, if he'd been this hugely generous, charismatic person who'd, shown all the good things, she may well have been that person.
Flip it with
Elon.
Elon.
Might have said sorry, and then people go, what, it's not your fault.
Totally.
It's clearly,
well, that happens
in your organisation.
It happens all the time with Elon Musk. He brings out the Cybertruck and he says, it's got bulletproof windows, and he throws a brick at the window and it breaks.
Yeah.
And he goes, I guess it's not as bulletproof as we thought. And everyone laughs along with the joke and everyone's fine with it. And he sells $10 billion worth of trucks, because we know the guy, we like the guy. We know that it will be bulletproof. If he says it's going to be bulletproof, it'll eventually be, he'll fix it.
Yeah.
And we just kind of get that, that he's there and he's putting his name on it and he's taking us on a journey with him.
It's very true what you say, because I've had Teslas for 5 years and I'm like a 0 NPS for Tesla. Like, as a company, I wouldn't recommend them because they deliver late. The customer service is terrible. They always tell you that they're growing too fast, and that's why they can't fix your problem. I've had so many problems, honestly. But I love the car. Like, the car is amazing, right? It's an incredible, piece of machine. And I love Elon, right?
Yeah,
and so in a really weird way, I still keep buying them, but I buy them for the car and for him. But he's almost a bit of a contingency plan for the brand failing. You are right.
It was a bit like how we all went and fell in love with Jobs, Steve Jobs throughout the 2000s, and we were just kind of like we wanted Apple to succeed because we wanted to see this comeback story, and every time he did the Macworld event, and what's he going to come up with next? What's he up to now? Yeah. And Steve Jobs absolutely went head to head with IBM in the early days. He was this. Steve Jobs was literally a kid in his 20s tackling a massive behemoth IBM. And his personal brand was the thing that made the difference. IBM was the big faceless company, big blue, just like a company brand as a color. And then along comes Steve Jobs, as this young person, and everyone went, wow, okay, I'm going to go along with that.
And I guess the points you make, they might sound like really obvious. There's these lots of, famous entrepreneurs in many cases behind these very successful brands, and it makes sense. But I got to tell you, I think at a grassroots level, a lot of entrepreneurs try and hide behind their business, and they don't put themselves at the front. And there may be some psychological reasons why. There's a fear of being famous or putting yourself out there. I don't know that there are sometimes people sometimes lack confidence around speaking and those things, and I get that. Although I do think some of the best people I've seen aren't necessarily those mad extroverts. They are quite.
Elon's totally a terrible speaker. So is Branson. Branson's a terrible speaker. Sorry if he's like in the, but Richard Branson, he's fun to show up and spray champagne on people, but he actually, when you see him give a talk, he gets incredibly nervous, and he's visibly nervous. Look, one of the things I've noticed that people get, there's a few reasons I know people don't want to be the face of the brand. So number one, people hate the idea of being in the spotlight. That type of person who craves the spotlight, the gratuitous narcissist who says, look at me, look at me, look at me, check out what I'm doing now, look at my breakfast, look at me squatting some weights in the gym. And it's just like, God, I don't want to be that person.
You're right. All the influencers on Instagram are like that, right?
Yeah, and you've met people like that, and you think, I would just hate to be like that person. The difference is, what I'm talking about is not being in the spotlight. And I know I'm going to sound cheesy, but it's becoming a spotlight. The difference is when you actually say, my job is to shine the light onto something, not to say, look at me, but look at that. And it's, if you're in an agency and you're onto something, if you've got an opinion about how people should be approaching the market, it's not about saying, check me out. It's about saying, check this out. This is what I think is the right thing to be doing. So that's a key difference. It's not the narcissistic agenda. It's the altruistic. I think we should all be paying more attention to this. So that's number one. The other thing people worry about hugely is, if I become the brand, how the hell do I sell the business? How do I move on when I'm ready to move on? I don't want to get pigeonholed. All of those sorts of things.
In fact, that's a really interesting point, because this week in our industry, last week, most people saw that one of the kind of main, how I would call an agency owner who acts as an influencer, who is a key person of influence, especially around social media and the sort of, I mean, probably be offended if I say this because he probably is more global, but the UK, almost our own UK product of Gary Vaynerchuk, Stephen Bartlett, who has done a fantastic job building a personal brand, built a global business and this is the key thing, right? Him and a few others, their businesses are scaled much quicker than the majority, like in the top 1%, because the personal brand's been so strong. And he stepped down. And so he stepped down. And of course, I remember 3 years ago when I first discovered this, I ran an event in the Charlotte Street Hotel in London, and it was called Agency Owners as Influencers, and why I felt that was the future. No, obviously years after you'd predicted it. And actually someone put their hand up and said, yeah, but what happens when Stephen Bartlett leaves?
Yeah.
And I said, I was like, well, I guess there's people are still going to be aware of social chain and that business, because he did talk about a lot about it. But what they've done so cleverly there, and it's obviously, I think you talk about this kind of tent sort of thing, but actually his it's infectious, let's call it, behaviours around talking about the work he does, then is actually spread. So Katie Leeson, who's the MD, she last year, within 1 year, I think, became one of the sort of LinkedIn influencers, and the leadership team there have all got really strong personal brands. So even though he stepped down, Social Chain has still got this incredible group of people, and probably more pervasive through the whole company. And so I guess, most people are thinking about trying to get the leader to have a key person of influence. The important thing's got to be to make the organisation have
so there's a bit of a transfer of power that happens when someone has a big personal brand, and when someone takes on that front-facing role, and they're willing to be the face of the brand, and they're willing to get out there with an opinion and get out there with some thoughts about how the world should work or how the industry should work. What happens is that person then attracts talent. And they attract overlings, not underlings. So what tends to happen is that you'll see someone like a Gary Vaynerchuk. He actually attracts people who are way better than him. So people go, I'd like to work at the VaynerMedia because Gary's just pulling in some interesting clients, and he's got an opinion, and I like the opinion. Some people don't, but I like it. Let's say. So what happens is these overlings come in. So you end up surrounding yourself with talent, this talent layer. And what happens with the talent layer is as the talent layer sets in, you're actually required less and less in the business doing anything functional. And then you get out there more and more kind of voicing the opinion. And as you get out there more and more voicing your opinion, you end up sending good clients into the talent layer. And as the good clients come in, more talent arrives, and suddenly there's this transfer of power. And the other thing that happens is that because you're putting your personal brand on things, you're creating trust. And people trust you and they trust the brand. And when they trust, they enter into long-term agreements. So literally subscription revenue. They literally, go on to long-term retainers. And it's the long-term retainers and the subscription revenue that makes the business on itself very valuable. Yeah. So there is initially people say, but what about this? Well, there's a transfer of power. The other cool thing, when you've got that personal brand and you do move on, you build something else very rapidly. It's
interesting actually, and I've not really thought about it before, but I guess especially if I connect it into agency world, because once a client becomes a client, we have this role of an account manager, which actually has been under attack a lot quite recently in the press, maybe because of COVID, and maybe people feel like there's more of a disconnection between the relationships between account people and their clients. But actually, if the account people and the teams build trust from the customers, in a way, I used to be taught it was it's like there's a word for it now. Manifest trust is a label for the trust that you get as an expert when you speak on stage. And I guess in a way, it's still trust. It's just a transfer from trust as being an expert, seeing someone who, you always believe what you read in the newspaper, or you believe what you read on TV, or, that kind of celebrity culture maybe. And then there's almost a different type of trust when someone's doing a good job for you, looking after you, got your back. And I guess it's still trust at the end of the day. But for me, taking this on one step further, I had to do an interview a couple of weeks ago now, and I looked at, there was 2 candidates, and I actually looked and saw who had the most equity online in terms of their. I'm less concerned these days about experience, but more about an ability for someone to learn and adapt quickly, but also have not be afraid to talk about their point of view and their opinion. So I think actually, maybe future employees, I'm guessing from what you've seen, it's going to be important now in the market.
Yeah, absolutely. It's already showing up because there's more and more of the gig economy where essentially teams are forming kind of like Hollywood teams. So, people get together for a movie, might be a year project, and then they move on. And the person who's the lighting guy is, that was the lighting guy for Inception. Okay, well, great. Well, let's get that, same sort of thing. So, people build up their brand equity. And what we're even seeing is that there's these big key people of influence who kind of carry the project. They're the lightning rod for the project. But then they're putting together people who've got a bit of a personal brand for the type of work that they're doing. So more and more, look, the one thing that's happening at the moment, especially accelerated by COVID, is we've got 2 magnets in the income economy, in where income sits in the economy. So globally, there's a global magnet at $75 a day, which is horrible news if you are in the UK or if you're in the US or Germany or something like that. Very, very bad news that there's a global average forming of $75 a day. It's wonderful news if you're in Turkey or if you're in Pakistan or India or the Philippines, because, there's more and more work at a higher rate than I'm normally getting. But here's the thing. For the next 12 months, everyone's going to absolutely love this whole work from home malarkey. And then about 12 months in, the big bosses are going to go, wait a second, if everyone's working from home, if everyone's working remotely, why are we not paying, half? With people in the Philippines who have master's degrees and who work on the UK time zone and who are brilliant, hardworking, talented people as well.
Yeah, as they get the systems and the processes to deal with working flexible, they might find where they can apply those.
The technology is facilitating it.
Yeah.
So what happened to blue-collar jobs in the 1970s is going to happen to white-collar jobs in the 2020s. We're going to see the massive outsourcing of lawyers, accountants, web developers, designers, creatives, video editors. All of those jobs are going to move to the low-income economies or lower-income economies.
Yeah, because I think actually agencies that I come across generally are really actually quite ethical. The next event I was going to do, which got cancelled, was actually called. We have a best-in-class series, but it was Agency for Good, because I'd noticed that most agencies that if they were going to outsource on the whole, and there's always the odd exceptional entrepreneur who's particularly ruthless, but generally they would go, I would rather pay a premium rate in that local country for someone who's good rather than just exploit them. Like I think so. I don't actually even think it's an exploitation thing. Like maybe it might have been in the 80s and 90s, but now
Not at
I think
all.
it's paying for almost better talent, almost the same rates, but still saving money.
If you're dealing with, like, for example, I've got 3 or 4 people on my team who are in the Philippines. We pay above market rate. They're phenomenal workers. They are every bit a part of the team. They're on, like we are one team. These are highly talented, highly qualified people. They work between time zones. Like, we're just having a great time with having some of our people in the Philippines. So magnet number 1 is that everyone's in competition for $75 a day, and it's moving up and moving down. Magnet number 2 is the key person of influence magnet, which is going up. So what's happened for someone who's got a key person of influence brand is that they previously, in the last few years, had a brand in the UK, and now they're having a brand on the time zone, and they're actually finding a vein within the time zone. And it might be that they're particularly known within a certain community, within a certain niche, and that is now a time zone phenomenon for them. And then the big ones are global. They're on all 3 major time zones. So for us, as I said, we've moved to London, Sydney, and Toronto, covering the global time zones, but we have a key person of influence on each time zone. Previously, we were a city model. So we had 7 city offices, and we had a key person of influence in each city. We don't need that anymore. But what's interesting is the value of that key person of influence brand is going through the roof because technology is leveraging it further and wider and deeper with the marketplace. And the value of the functional behavior, the functional talent, is going down, while the vitality talent, I kind of define roles as vitality versus functionality. Okay. Functionality is doing the job. Yep. Vitality is bringing life force into it, irreplaceable life force, the energy, the spirit of it, the brand.
The business creators almost as well.
Yeah, the one who kind of has and also holds the keys to the relationship, the one who wins the market over. That role is good. The value of that's going through the roof at the moment. So we're getting almost this 2-speed thing happening in the Western economies, where you're either on the technology and going like that, or you're on the tools going like that.
Yeah, we're about to take our book, Agencynomics, off sale because, when I wrote it was 6 years ago, and it took about 4 years to get it published. And actually, it was very much based on that city model. And so, COVID has really disrupted that. I mean, the 2 key areas that I've seen emerge so far is, and it's actually quite interesting because some people call the Uber model, 100% distributed, but of course Uber has a head office, right? So Uber has full-time people, but it's either I call that the hybrid model. Yeah. So there's either going to be a model where there's a core team and then they'll flex globally, locally, globally, regionally, as you say, and they'll be able to increase up and down. And then if anything like COVID ever struck again, there's a way to go back to the core team and be more secure. And I interviewed someone called Tamara from was eModeration, now called Social Element, and it says how long I've known her. Sorry, I quoted her old name. And she built her whole business on that model of having a core team and then flexible. Although not everyone globally isn't recruited, and so that model for me seems like one of the future models. Whereas when I wrote the book, I was very much focused on sort of build it near a city because that's where all the businesses are based. Yeah. And actually, I think COVID, 35% of all businesses in the UK, so over a third, are based in London and like the M25 area. Yeah. But I'm really hoping, I don't know whether this is right on what you say then, because I really love the time zone perspective, is I'm really hoping there's a redistribution of wealth, but because I hope that the London centricity because I always feel sorry for because I used to work for a company in Barnsley when I was, and my agency was in Farnborough, so I've always been a fan of regional business, but also I know how underinvested it is, and they do have some good regional grants, but generally there's too much of a concentration. But I wonder whether post-COVID, with people working remotely, whether the UK economy will become more even. Or will it always have that, center point?
Already we're seeing people, the searches on real estate websites for houses outside of London has gone up 40-50%. It is people are really seriously moving out of big cities. The USA, New York has seen a massive decline. Something like San Francisco and New York are the hardest hit. They've gone from like 3% vacancy to 9 and 12% vacancies. Huge vacancies as people say, you know what, these big expensive cities where you get a tiny little flat, everything revolves around work life and restaurants and all of that. People are saying, you know what, let's move out. Me personally, today I've spoken at 3 events. So this morning started early, and I've done 3 speaking engagements in the morning, and then came out to see you here. And they're all over the world, and it doesn't really matter particularly where I am. It just matters that I can jump on Zoom. Now, each one of those conferences had between 50 and 200 people. Yeah. So I'm doing live events for 600 people today. And haven't had to leave the house.
The question I have for you on that is, and by the way, where I live in Hampshire, I live in a small village, and every house that's gone on the market has sold. Like I can see. That normally houses are on the market for a long time where I live. Yeah. But they've all gone really quickly. So, and I've actually two of my closest friends have just, one's moving to Essex, one's moving to Hampshire. So I'm seeing the Londoners from Islington move out. Not everyone. I mean, I've spoken to a lot of people who have said, actually, like, you're obviously slightly more on the outside, and so is a few of my friends on the north side, and they've said, we're far enough away from the middle that actually we got some green where we are, and it's not so bad. But the question I've got for you, which because this is one of the things I sort of nag a little bit the clients I non-exec for is your business is circa 10 million. I don't know, we won't go into detail numbers, but around that number, how many speaking events do you do a year? Do you think, if you had to guess it? You did three, potentially 4 today with this interview.
It would probably average out at 2 a week.
2 weeks, about 100. And I think I've been quoting this a lot recently. I think Stephen Bartlett said last year he'd completed, and I always misquote it, but somewhere like around 60 in the year. Yeah. I think there's correlation, by the way, between the people I know that put themselves out there to large audiences speaking and the money, as you said, key people of influence. There's no question that people should try and, in my mind, benchmark a target at least.
Here's an interesting one. Did you feel sad when David Bowie passed away?
No, but I felt sad when Prince went away.
Okay,
and by the way, because I've read your book, I want you to share this story. So I know where you're going to go. So please, tell me about that.
So you feel sad when Prince passes away, but how many times did you physically meet Prince?
Never. I got close to the O2, but that was about it.
You were maybe in the same big room as Prince one time. But how many times would Prince remember that you guys met? Never. Right. So the funny thing is that humans, we bond based upon something called 7-11-4. 7 hours, 11 interactions, 4 locations. So this is based upon different research, some of it from Google, some of it from academic research into bonding behavior. So if we spend 7 hours on a flight together, London to Singapore, we've got 13 hours, we chat, we spend over 7 hours, and we're chatting away, and at the end we exchange business cards and all that sort of stuff. It actually feels like we're probably going to keep in touch, and there's a connection that has been made because of the 7 hours. If I saw you on a shorter flight, a couple of hours, and then I saw you at a local restaurant and we ended up chatting, we went for a walk around the park or something, having a chat, that's also bonding behavior. So the human brain has actually evolved that when we spend 7 hours together, have 11 interactions or 4 locations, we move that person into a new category called someone we know. Yeah. Now, with digital, what we're able to do is watch YouTube videos, that's one location, connect on Facebook, that's another location. We listen to a podcast for an hour, that's an hour. And we actually go through the same primitive bonding behavior, even though we've never been in the same location. So when I turn up and do a talk and there's 100 people in the room and I speak for an hour, I've actually clocked up an hour with 100 people. So something non-linear is happening. If I release a podcast and someone listens to it and it goes, let's say 6,000 people listen to that podcast for an hour, I've actually, it's to the human brain to the listener, it's almost as if we've sat down and had a cup of coffee together. You and I met in Adam Street in 2007, something like that. At that particular time, I used to do back-to-back coffee meetings all the time. So I would meet with 5 or 6 people one-to-one, having a coffee meeting. And the funny thing I've found is that when I speak in front of a group of 100 to 200 people, the same business outcomes happen as if I'd had 100 cups of coffee with someone.
Yeah, smarter use of time as well, though, right?
Yeah. So suddenly, when for me, I'll always prioritize a speaking engagement because it's effectively a first cup of coffee with 100 people at a time.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people have heard me say this before, but when I had Blue Halo, I had one KPI, not key person, but as in
performance indicator.
Performance indicator, the other KPI, and it was to meet 50 new people each month. Now, I'd probably be today if I did it again, I'd be a bit mature. I'd probably say 50 meaningful conversations, but back then it was new people.
Yep.
But I had this target, and when I did it, I would always bring in £250,000 worth of new business a year. That was my number. Meet 50 new people, and it was only really 3 of the 50 that serendipitously would need what I did at that time. But here's the crazy thing. So I then started to cheat at my own game. So I was like, well, how do I meet 50 people? Because it's having lots of cups of coffee in Adam Street or a hospital club, wherever it was at the time, it's quite time consuming.
Yeah.
So I was like, it's a lot of caffeine. Yeah. So I started to optimize and go, well, if I speak to 100 people, then 14 will come up after in one go. And they've heard me speak. So you're right, it's the same kind of...
And 3 of them, 3
and
to 6.
By the way, and there's so one of the guys, my new business guy, he's actually got his own agency now, Giant, Vin Patel. He was sort of one of my sort of closest team members at Blue Halo. He always used to say to me, if I can meet someone 5 times before the pitch or before they make a decision, I'll usually win the business. And it's probably a similar thing. He's getting that 7 hours probably in through that all those conversations.
You're pretty much almost bonded at that point. From a human.
And it's so true what you say, but I've never looked at it that way before, the journey, because whenever I talk about shared memorable experiences, and I say that the people that so I have this friend called Duncan from Newcastle, and I always say, like, if I had to list my top 20 friends in the world, right, he'd be on there. But I've only ever met him 7 times. And 6 of those have been overseas at a stag do or a wedding. And I went on a roller coaster with him at 6 a.m. in Vegas. And the experience, like the time, like whenever I see him, it's like, Duncan, it's like Spencer, like, remember that time on the roller coaster? But it's almost like the trust and the bond and the connection through those experiences. So the time, I think, and also sometimes like a journey, I think is good to go with someone on a journey.
In the bonding experience research I read, they had 2 people sitting on a chair, on 2 chairs next to each other, talking for half an hour. And then they had 2 people who would move to 4 locations over the course of half an hour. And the people who sat in one location for half an hour talking versus the people who moved around 4 locations talking, these people felt, the people who moved around felt much more bonded than the people who had one experience. Really? And it's kind of like in the workplace. If you only see people at work, you feel like this about them, and then you go out bowling and, I see them in a different way. And then, you go out to dinner afterwards and you get to know them a little more. And suddenly different locations create a different bonding experience. So peak experiences, in Google's research, 0 moments of truth, they talk about 11 positive interactions. And that people basically, it was 10. What they did is they looked at people buying stuff and they went through their browser history and they found out that they had actually, before they made the purchase, there was 10.4 or 10.7 interactions, touch points to the brand before buying. So we just call that the 7-11-4 rule, that at all times you should be 7-11-4ing the market.
It's funny, it is the same for us, because I the year I sold my agency, I was BDO with the guys that sold my business back in the day, and I was in their offices, and it was 2007, and there was a briefing on the economy, like a year before it crashed, saying how amazing it was. Anyway, and it was quite a boring...
Almost a leading indicator of a bad economy,
Yeah, well, I think most economists never get it right, okay? So, but he was a really charismatic guy, and and actually, even though I was in a firm of accountants, it's sort of not really the perfect romantic idea of networking and meeting interesting people, but genuinely a fascinating talk. And then I happened to talk to somebody afterwards over as a breakfast, a croissant and a cup of coffee, and we swapped cards. And actually, it was 7. I worked out every year I send a LinkedIn message out to everyone for my sins, and I'd sent him 7 messages once a year for 7 years, and it was on the 7th one he rang up and said, "Hey, listen, I've got £750,000 I need to spend on mobile. Which agency should I use?" And so then I really clicked with the touch point side of things. I realised that actually when I meet people that actually as long as I can keep those interactions going, it's a bit like this is probably my really remedial marketing explanation. Most of the people listening to this are really expert marketeers. But when you have direct mail and you go through the whole year getting those Sky things through the door, and you're like, "Oh, I'm with BT. I'm not going to go to Sky." And then 1 month BT really pissed you off, and you're like, "Right, where's that Sky?" And they just know that's why they're there every month, right? Just to wait for that opportunity. Touch point.
So essentially, that key person of influence role, that is the person who's good at managing relationships, but they're just doing it at scale. They're kind of essentially doing what the BT, the Sky Flyer is doing. They just keep showing up. They're consistent. They're like a brand. They're consistent. You mentioned that Gary Vaynerchuk and Casey were dressed a certain way and spoke a certain way. They're consistent. They just keep showing up in the same way and building that brand and building those touch points. And then eventually you do that with 1 million people and a lot of business turns up. Yeah,
like you could chop their heads off and you could look at what they're wearing and you knew who they were, right? So sure. So key person influence. Do you see the rest of industry? So I'm in a, like you, my network is mainly entrepreneurial friends, tech friends, and agency owners, and leaders. Do you think the rest of society, rest of commercial business, other sectors will, wake up to this? Because during COVID, certainly everyone's jumped on. Well, everyone's had to almost be on LinkedIn. And what I've realised is that I used to say this thing about it's about the quality of content, but now it's almost quality and quantity. And so, do you feel that there will just always be sectors where people just don't stand up and be a key KPI? Or do you think ultimately in the future of industry, every business will have a leader who is high profile? Or
every industry will at some point discover that that's a great cut through, and certain industries will get frustrated that too many people are doing it and that there's diminishing returns. There's a huge return for being the first rock and roll band. That means you're going to be iconic for the rest of the time, right? So, or the first, one of the first big rock and roll bands. But there's much more diminishing returns being the 30,000.
So what you're saying is, if you're in a niche that doesn't have a KPI, grab it quickly, because eventually everybody else will be a challenger.
Exactly. So, like for example, we've got clients who are grabbing the writing wills as a niche, and talking about wills as your last love letter, and those sorts of things. And we've got people who are talking about architecture, and so grab it if you can grab it, because it would be wonderful to be in a niche where there's not a lot of key people of influence. In many ways, if other people are doing it, if it's starting to emerge as a thing, unfortunately, it will move through a phase where it's the standard, that if you're not, you're at a massive disadvantage, and you kind of have to be, to an extent, playing that role just to compete, just to be in the game.
Yeah, but what I've noticed is, though, there are certain people who have an ability to augment significantly. So when I look at, so there's actually another massive fan of yours. When I did a post saying I was talking to you, I had quite a few people going, "Oh, can't believe it. I love Daniel Priestley." And his name, Andrew Dobby from Made Brave. So he'll probably like me. He desperately wants you on his podcast, by the way, as well. But he has been incredible. So he's another example for me of an agency owner who has really worked on his personal brand story. So he always had this wonderful story about how, he had a baby, and basically how he wasn't going to work long hours. He wanted to, basically be there to see his baby grow up. And he had like about 14p to start his agency. And he shows a picture of his first office, which is like most of us, like me and my purple shared this kind of bedroom. And anyway, now he's just built the most wonderful agency in Glasgow called Made Brave. And some of the clever things he did. So he was doing about 4 or 5 posts a day, up to 100,000 views on the content. And what I learned from him was that actually the volume of activity and how everything got augmented. Suddenly, he's ringing me up saying, "Hey, I'm getting loads of inbound leads. This is the height of COVID when no one's spending any money at all, right? In the first month. And he's getting inbound leads because he's so much noisier than everybody else. Everybody else who's trying to be a key person isn't quite there. He's just got a larger audience. And he, you know, he literally was at home with his kid, his son, and he's building TikTok videos, which could sound quite cheesy, but actually in a really great way. Like, he's got some time with his son. He's got his son practicing with him. And of course, the brands are then going, well, you can do TikTok and you're creative and he's everywhere. And he starts winning business from it. And it's just genius, really. But the thing that I'm trying to say is I think it's augmenting it now. It feels to me like if you've been in there early, it's easier for you to have a bigger audience, you know, whatever. And if you're coming in now, you've got to fight a little bit, probably.
Yeah, it's a little bit like if you imagine a wave, and there were certain people who have been seeing that wave coming, paddling their surfboard and getting ready to surf. And COVID was that wave. And it was, you know, literally, if you already were well positioned, it was something that you suddenly stood up and surfed. For us, we would normally get in our UMEA time zone, we'd normally get 120 to 150 inbound inquiries a week, and suddenly it just went to 380, 400, you know, and it just was like, you know, it was always above 400 for the last several. It's
because more people were reading and more people were learning.
There's a couple of reasons. People spending more time online, and also during times of uncertainty, people look for leadership and they think, who do I know who might have an opinion on that? Or they might say, in my case, people said, okay, Daniel, in 2015, 16, 17 said that 2020 was going to be a massively disruptive year and that it was all going to go batshit crazy in the 2020s. And I think, I even mentioned that in the back of some of my books. In 24 Assets, I say, get ready for the 2020s because it's not going to be a smooth ride. And people are like, wow, okay, well, what are you saying now? Because... You know, so I've sort of flagged that out, and it wasn't because I knew anything about COVID. I knew
the cycles, like, because I was the same. I felt that 2018 was going to be the time when, because the 8-year cycle from 2010 to 2018, and if you look at those cycles, they're really 8 to 10 years typically. In fact, it was 10 years to 2020, so I was 2 years out. But I felt there was going to be an adjustment. You know.
I was looking at baby boomers. So baby boomers in the US, baby boomers own 21 trillion worth of assets.
So they're the Gen X's, are they? The one before Gen X.
Baby boomers are 1946 to 1964.
My parents.
Beatlemania.
Yeah.
Right. So if you imagine Beatlemania, basically what happened is there was World War II ended. All the people came back from the war and had lots of babies. So there was this young...
Yeah, my dad was one of 11, so there's proof of that.
There you go. Wow, right? So they were happy to see each other. So basically, the baby boomer generation, there's hardly any babies right up to 1946, and then it explodes for like 7-8 years. It's just, you know, if you look at it on a chart, it's explosive. And if you look at the song "I Want to Hold Your Hand," right at that moment when they're just hitting their their teen years, bang, I want to hold your hand, perfect, I want to buy that. And then, you know, huge numbers of them. And then 1964, Roald Dahl does, kids literature, and he'd never been hugely famous. He was an adult literature writer in the New Yorker, and then he writes some kids' books, and then bang, all these kids buy it. And then in the 1970s, they all want used cars, so bang, they buy the used cars, and used cars, you can't get a used car in the 1970s, 1980s.
Yeah, decimalisation as well. So all of them, I think my from memory, they bought a house, and literally overnight decimalisation meant the value of everything went up massively.
Yeah, well, the houses in the 80s, consumer electronics and furniture in the 90s as they filled their houses with stuff. And then from 2000s, it's been investment products. So everything is about the dot-com bubble, the housing bubble. You know, so as the boomers move from one investing fad to the next, they blow it up, and then it collapses. Now, what happens is that when people turn 70, they go from investors to divestors, they take money out of the market. And boomers in the 20s are all in their they're going into their 70s. 1946, the oldest ones turn 70. 1920s the 2020s is the big year where the most boomers turn 70. Right. So it was always going to be a turbulent year for all involved as the Beatlemania hit retirement mania.
Yeah. So let's I'd like to talk more about that in a little bit later on, because I'd be good to talk to you more about data, because I know it's a really big thing for you on your What's Next list. But I can't skip over oversubscribed because, in fact, actually on KPI, one question for you before I forget, which is when I went back and I reevaluated myself about 3 months ago, I thought I'll go back and I'll just reread it again and I'll see how I've performed. The only thing I failed on was the Wikipedia test. And because there's a Spencer Gallagher in the States who's a NASCAR driver, so my arch enemy. And
you mean the Google test? You are
well,
Google.
yeah. You said in there, you said Google yourself, but also, I mean, like, I do come up. I mean, sad people now Google themselves.
No.
But the point is,
it's a brand audit.
But the Wikipedia listing and what it comes down to is notoriety. And so I think this is something you said earlier on about people worried about putting themselves out there too much. And I don't want to be famous, right? I mean, I do this in a very niche area, like everything. I'm a convert. I'm in a hyper niche area. I work with agency founders, and so I don't want to be on TV. I don't want to be necessarily in Forbes magazine, but actually you do need to have, I've noticed, some notoriety to actually crack that part of it. Like, even if I've written a book, it doesn't get me on Wikipedia these days.
No.
You almost have to have extra notoriety.
People say, I wouldn't want to be famous.
Yeah.
Not knowing that being famous is a full-time job. Like, you have got to put your foot on that accelerator non-stop. When you talk to someone who is famous, they are constantly pushing the button to try and be famous, and it is an exhausting role. And the minute you take your foot off the button of pushing the fame button, you come crashing to earth real fast. You can be famous 20 minutes ago.
I think I've got too much of a fragile ego to be famous.
So people are like, I wouldn't want to put myself out there. I might accidentally become famous. You're not accidentally going to be famous. It's like saying you might accidentally win the Olympics. There is no...
But I guess I felt like I failed because it was the one thing in your book. I'm not in Wikipedia and I can't do that one last thing. It's like, is it okay? Am I still a KPI if I'm not in Wikipedia?
The main test is the test.
Did I get the Daniel seal of approval? Sorry.
No, you do not. No KPI for you. But the main test is the Google test. It's you are who Google says you are, and you want to be really careful. If you've got some serial killer in Florida who's got the same name as you, as unfair as it is, people just people's brain is so the primitive wiring. If I Google you,
I'm pretty sure my business partner Pete has got some weird, killer.
There's a huge number of people who've got a famous porn star or something like that. You've really got to make sure that you drown that out.
I would depole. So I'd have to change my name.
Yeah, you've got a good KPI name.
You think so?
Yeah, it's a good...
Well, it was even better before. Not many people know this. I probably should reveal this, but my actual name isn't Gallagher. I did change it. So because, as I said, my dad came from quite a large family, and Irish typically were very, very good at writing things down phonetically. So actually I was born Gallagher, which is a very OCKER. And I used to ring up people when I was younger, and I go, hi, it's Spencer Gallagher. And they go, what? Down the phone, but no one could get hold of the name. So in the end, I depotted it back to Gallagher.
You rebranded.
I rebranded to Gallagher. Actually, when I got married, and it was a godsend because people can say Gallagher or Gallagher really easily. So I oversubscribed again. Another book. When I read it, I was like, yes, and that's why I told everybody, because I felt like it was validating a lot of my personal philosophy around sort of marketing. Also, there was something you wrote early on in the book that I was like, finally. And it was very much around advocacy and referrals. So, for example, I ran some really big surveys recently in the agency industry. One with UK owners and one with international owners, and we found that in the UK, so basically, what was the lead source of your largest deal? Now, most agencies have one large client who's pretty much the standout flagship client. And in the UK, 50% of people came back and said it came from one kind of referral or another. And internationally, so they did a global survey, 53 countries, it came back as 60% globally of their number one client came from some kind of referral. Now, a referral could have been a client, a network, it could have been a partner, but it was still, like, if there was a silver bullet in agency new business, I'd found it. Whereas, everyone talks about content marketing and they talk about social media. But in the book you actually wrote in this, I'm pretty sure it says like over half the business should come from something around that area, like your word of mouth and people and advocacy, and you mustn't rule that out.
But I think the chapter says remarkable budget versus marketing budget. That when you're truly remarkable, and people, by definition, people remark about the business. If you're positively remarkable,
was it.
then essentially your advertising budget drops to zero. In essence, Tesla is actually, they don't spend any money on traditional advertising or marketing. They just purely and simply are at this point, a remarkable business. What they have is so unique in the marketplace that we talk about it. So therefore, their advertising budget is zero because they've got plenty of people, they're oversubscribed, and they have plenty of people remarking.
Yeah. So give us a little synopsis for those people who haven't read oversubscribe, because I think a lot of people probably heard of KPI, but can you give us a little bit of an overview?
So oversubscribe, very simply, it goes right back to my very, 18, 19, I got talking to a guy who was a multi-millionaire stock market trader, and we were doing a roadshow when I was working for this particular company, and I asked him, how do you become successful as a stock market trader? And he says, well, you got to buy low and sell high, right? And I said, well, how do you know? And we're just talking over after an event. And he said, well, you got to know why markets go up and why they go down. And they go up because there's more buyers than sellers, and they come down because there's more sellers than buyers, and that's it. And I thought they kind of like, he made the point that it doesn't really matter whether you've got a good CEO, a good product, none of that really matters. If there's more buyers than sellers, it goes through the roof. And getting back to Tesla's gone from 200 to 2,000 in 12 months, not because their sales have gone 10x. There's just more buyers than sellers on the actual stock. So he made this point really clearly to me, and he said, you can have a great product and a great CEO and a great everything, and then if there's more sellers than buyers on the stock, it goes down. And that idea stuck in my head for some reason, and I never got into stock market anything, but I really was fascinated by this idea that you only make money when there's more buyers than sellers. And I started seeing it everywhere, that for example, if there's a waiting list for a nightclub and it's hard to get into and there's always people, then that's the most profitable nightclub. And if there's, if you can't buy a Rolex and you really want to buy a Rolex and you have to join a 12-month waiting list to buy a Rolex is a hugely profitable business. And you start seeing this again and again and again, this concept of being oversubscribed. Then you hear about, a big airline and they have empty seats. They're undersubscribed. It doesn't matter how big the business is. They could be big and established and 100 years old, but if they're flying planes and a third of those seats aren't full, they are losing money. And it really just kind of got me that if you're oversubscribed, you make profit. Profit is tolerated because the market only ever tolerates profit. And if you're undersubscribed, the market hammers you down until you're losing an amount of money that you'll tolerate. So I thought to myself, well, if that's the case, if that's true, you should pick a number where you can deliver phenomenal, great, standout service. You can do something really exceptional for a group of people, whatever that number is. For some businesses, it's 400. For some, it's 4,000. For some, it's 4, right? So you pick that number and you protect that capacity and you say, no matter what, if you get into the nightclub, you are going to have one hell of an experience. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be just a magical experience if you're a client. And you reverse engineer that beautiful experience. You build it so that it's just that positively remarkable capacity that you have to deliver, and then you protect it. And you basically say, we're not going to take 401, we're not going to take 402, the capacity is 400, and that's it.
Yep.
Now, you do something pretty crazy, which is you tell the market that. So you actually say, we're going to have 400 clients, and that's it for a period of time. And if you're interested, then you can be a client. So the goal is to become oversubscribed, is that you have a multiple of the capacity of people signaling interest. So rather than marketing for sales, you market for signals. And if your capacity is 400, you try and get 2,000 signals, 5 times capacity for signaled interest. And then what you do is you re-signal back to market and you say, we've had 2,000 signaled interest for 400 capacity. We're going to go live, and now you can buy.
Yep.
This creates urgency, provided there are logical and emotional reasons to buy, plus the ingredient of urgency. You end up being massively oversubscribed, and you make profit. So I've been working with companies to orchestrate this, and what we do is we actually go through a whole dance with the marketplace. It's exhausting, but it works. And the dance is signals out, signals out, signals out, signal collect, signal collect, signal collect, signal collect, signal collect. Once we've got an imbalance of signaled interest to capacity, we tell the marketplace that we're oversubscribed on signaled interest, and then we open it up and bang.
Yep.
And you see something like Glastonbury as a very public example of how this works. 36 minutes, 140,000 tickets gone.
In fact, in the book, you talk about quite a lot of sort of music concerts where tickets get released.
Tickets are available anytime you want
24
them.
hours, and then that's it. Now you've missed out. And then when they then release them again, there's this pent up demand.
Yeah.
Wow, I can't miss out again. There's an element of sort of scarcity and sort of I guess what's the other word I'm looking for? Sort of
what you're building,
supply demand issue,
demand and supply tension.
Yeah,
that's what you
demand,
want.
supply tension.
You want demand and supply tension. You want to build tension. So most companies are going out there saying, please buy, please buy, please buy, which actually essentially says we have excess supply and not enough people wanting it. And what you can't do is that you've got to say, signal your interest if you're interested. You can't buy, but you can signal interest. And this is the stupid dance, and it's annoying and it's frustrating. And if you love what you do, you just want to get on with doing the work. But actually, this dance of getting yourself oversubscribed is worth doing, because then you can do the work profitably.
Yeah. So here's the challenge with agencies, because what happens is, and so when I read the book, I laughed because sometimes I think I'm quite let's say not optimistic, but I set quite high ambitions and targets for my clients, but I think they're realistic. But you had an even bigger target. So you talked about creating a sort of a 5 or a 10 times oversubscribed model. I think it was 5 times oversubscribed.
5 times on signaled interest.
Yeah, on signaled interest. So what happens in agency businesses is there's about 3 things I sort of learned. The first one is that if someone is continually not hitting their, let's say, the sales number that gives them full capacity, they're behind it. They've got more people than they can find sales.
Yep.
They become desperate.
Yep.
They chase. Their body language
They lose
changes.
confidence.
They lose confidence. They think nothing's wrong, but everyone smells the fear, right? And everyone sees that. And
it's actually hardwired into our nervous system. When we have an abundance of options, we naturally project confidence, and we have limited options, we naturally project fear. And this is across the board. People who have plenty of options,
so if you're in that position, you've got to be like really self-aware. So what I normally do is I say, unfortunately, you need to cut back your overhead, because you've got to look at the numbers you can achieve, and you need to cut your cloth accordingly, because it's very hard to catch up and to chase a sales target, because
you end up in a race to the bottom.
And then they always say to me, well, yeah, but if I do that, if I lose the key people in the business, then I'm never going to find them again, because I'm based in, Lowestoft, and there's only 10 good, people here that can do that stuff. And I'm like, well, yeah, but if you don't do it, you'll probably lose the whole business, because eventually you just won't make any money and you'll just go under. So many a time I've gone in, and it's never a nice experience. Like, I don't like doing this, but sometimes a few jobs to save the company is the right way. Sometimes there's other ways of doing it. You can cut salaries, you can optimize.
If you cut 2 to save 10.
Exactly. And so, and I always try my best to do things ethically and get them to find other roles. But every time I cut back, the businesses, I guarantee in 1 quarter, they just spring back, and they're like, no, I can't get hold of those people now. And it's like, my fault. But because they're now in a position where they're succeeding, the confidence is back.
They returned the balance of demand and supply tension. Is what happened. And interesting. In COVID, we had a number of clients say to us, "What do we do?" And I said, "Put your prices up." And they said, "Why would we put our prices up?" I said, "Because you're going to have less clients. So you don't want to have a double whammy of less clients at a lower rate. You want less clients at a higher rate. So put your prices up and tell everyone you're putting your prices up. And then go, rather than going a cheaper solution online, right, go a more exclusive solution high end. So now, rather than chasing the market down, find the people who absolutely want an exclusive high end dedicated level of service, and go up. Everyone's going to go down. Everyone who took my advice of putting their prices up and going to the top of the market, not the bottom of the market, has done very, very well. And actually, they've seen their business booming at a higher price.
Amazing. And I think you always hear those very logical approaches, but it takes sometimes a lot of guts to make that decision. There's that kind of like, it's the classic thing of sort of firing your least 10% profitable clients. It's always proven in every kind of economic study that your revenues will go up and your profit will go up, but yet everyone's scared of losing the cash or whatever from those small 10%. But here's the second challenge in agencies. So they sell things, and then they panic that they can't deliver a high quality service. So they become not oversubscribed. They become someone who is reasonably hitting a number each month. They then recruit accordingly, but then the volatility of the business can go up and down, and then they find themselves back in that. So my philosophy, and Pete has been, and really the Cactus philosophy has always been, we believe in you work out your weighted pipeline, and we only let people accept that a third of that will come in. So most people say your weighted pipeline, so your opportunities times your gut feel, you're going to win that. We say no. Anything guaranteed is about 1/3 of that. So in a way, we're always telling people we want their pipeline to be 3 times bigger. You're sort of saying 5 times, so I might go back and push it up now. But
it depends on how hot the signal is. If it's a moderate signal, then 5 times. Cold signal, 10 times. If it's quite a hot signal, 3 times would be fine. But one thing that I've encouraged agencies to do is create start dates and actually be really unreasonable and say you can't start until 2021 now. We're fully subscribed till 2021. What we want to do for you is have a strategy and execute it for you and all of those sorts of things. But in order to do it properly, we need to gear up for you as a client. And we have certain clients starting at these particular start dates. So we have quarterly start dates. If you miss that quarterly start date, you can't start till the next quarter.
And the thing is, though, is what you say is so true. Like, I've been in the position when I had my own agency where we genuinely had the start date that was 8 weeks away. And when you've got it, as you know, the dynamic changes because all of a sudden you're selling in advance. You're booking ahead. You've always hit your number 2 months or 3 months early. And then, but when you're not in that position, it's very hard psychologically, I think, to have the the kind of the confidence sometimes to say it. So it's almost like we say you've got to make sure that you start off in that position and make sure you don't over recruit, over resource up because it's a service rather than product. You've always got to be always behind on resource, so you are oversubscribed, if that makes sense.
So the way you regain your confidence is start marketing for signals, not sales. So marketing for a sale is basically, will you buy, will you spend money and all that sort of stuff? Will you sign a purchase order? Marketing for signals is we're looking at creating this kind of campaign or this kind of product or service in 2021. Would you be interested in that? Is that something you'd have budget for? Is that, what kind of thing would you want? Would you fill in just an expression of interest that tells us a bit about your needs in that regard? And what you're doing is you're just saying, hey, look, there's nothing for sale, there's nothing to buy. I just want some signaled interest so that we can collate some data and start, engineering things in the right direction. Now, what gives you the regained confidence is when you know that you can take on 6 clients and there's 35 people who have said, signaled their interest that that's something that I'd be interested in. And there's the cool moment where you get to go back to everyone and say, hey, look, we actually had 35 expressions of interest for this product, but we can only take on 6. And suddenly there's this reversal of, oh, wow, okay, tension. It's interesting because whenever I've got someone who says, I really need a pay rise or I want to put my pay up, or an employee, I say, go apply for a bunch of other jobs. Just get in the pipeline for a bunch of other jobs. And when you have 3, 4, 5, 6 other jobs that are lined up that are 10 grand a year more, and you go in for the negotiation, you sit down at the negotiation table and you're actually in the final interviews, even if you haven't got those jobs.
So what's wonderful about that story and where it relates to agencies especially is when I built Premiership Football Club website. I had a couple when I had my agency. And I was so keen to win the business that they wanted a retainer of a certain number of hours per month, and so I drew this almost like a mobile phone tariff rate table out where the more hours they bought, the lower the rate was. But because I was so keen to win them, they took the most hours, and the hour rate was like £40 an hour, and I couldn't make money at £40 an hour. I didn't expect them to take it, but the retainer was quite hefty. Anyway, so give it a year, and I'm a year in, and I'm thinking, this is a really unprofitable client. And we had done an incredible job. But I know that if I'd gone back to them and said, listen, I need you to pay more money, like you just said a minute ago with the example of they probably would have said, okay, well, we're not paying any more because, we will pay, Premiership footballers millions of pounds, but we won't pay our web developers that much. But however, I had another piece of business that I'd won. Of course, the same thing. So I went in and said, I knew if they said no, it didn't matter. And it's a bit like when you play poker. If you can bluff, you're going to win, right? So I went in and said, listen, I'm really sorry, but, we need to, I know you probably don't want to pay that.
Yeah.
I know we've done a great job, but the reality is that I'm just not making money.
Yeah.
And the dynamic had changed because I was confident. Whereas I think if I'd gone in almost begging to get the rate up. So I think when you replace existing clients or you're trying to get rates up, as you like say, having lots of job interviews lined up is a really good way.
What most people do is they go into a negotiation. Negotiation's a terrible idea. What you want is to go into an auction and then a negotiation. So first an auction, then a negotiation. So if you went in and said, hey, look, 40's not fair and blah, 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 that's a negotiation. But if you've got someone else willing to pay 60, that's an auction. And you say, I've got a higher bidder, right? So my over here, I have a higher bidder. What are you willing to bid? And they say, well, we're not willing to increase our bid. Fine, I've got a higher bidder. So it's actually genuinely an auction. Now have a look at WhatsApp. WhatsApp sold for $19 billion. And it only had 200 employees at the time and it had no revenue, all of that sort of stuff. So if you were to negotiate what the right price would be, I mean, what would the right price be? Maybe 100 million, 200 million, maybe, I don't know. How would you value it in a negotiation? You could
it was like several $1,000 a user, wasn't it, at the time? I remember.
Yeah, you could argue that it's worth $1 million per employee. There's 200 employees, so 200 million is a very generous offer. If you basically said, we're going to value it like that. So there's plenty of negotiation that would say it's not worth 20 billion. But what they had is an auction first. So Facebook, Google, Facebook, Google, Facebook, Google, Facebook, Google. It goes into the stratosphere, 3 times the value of the Royal Mail. Bang, right? It's up there. And then finally after the auction, they did a negotiation. They said, all right, look, we've hit 19 billion. Are you willing to do this? Are you willing to do this? What terms? So first an auction, then a negotiation. Now, what most people do out of politeness or naivety is they just enter negotiations. You should never enter a negotiation unless it's come after an auction.
That's absolutely fantastic advice. And I think everyone will be going away now rethinking about exactly how they handle conversations on pricing moving forwards. So oversubscribed, I can't recommend it enough. I think the psychology of trying to get people to stop trying to aim for a sales target and trying to create, an abundance of business coming in is, I think we're all too guilty of aiming for a number, and sometimes we miss that number and we don't sort of go for that oversubscribed model of trying to aim, for much more to create more demand, more excess than we can fulfill, and therefore building much more, choosing the clients they want to work with, getting the better day rates. I mean, the advantages, choosing people who are nicer to work with. There's so many advantages to it. But sometimes I think, as I said, with agencies, they care so much about delivery that what they do is they'll quickly ramp up resource too quickly to make sure they never let anyone down. And I understand that, but maybe there's a saying, isn't there, about, it's hire slow and fire fast. It's almost like try and keep the resource, but I think especially post-COVID.
Yeah, you got to see the value in maintaining that demand and supply tension, and that, there's that old saying of Studio 54, that the guy who started Studio 54 would rather have a lineup out the front and an empty club than have a half-empty club.
Yeah, and where the signals really work well is, I think, with the actual the event marketing. So when agencies do events or any kind of marketing activity, using the signals to try and create that demand for the events they're running, because that's where they get to really build the chemistry and the trust with people. And so I think there's some really, so that there's, sometimes the product in an agency is actually some of the marketing. It's not always the service. Sometimes the service is very bespoke because a customer has a particular niche requirement rather than a productized solution. Sometimes it can be productized, of course, but it's, sometimes the marketing activity, you can build the signals in to create, the over demand. And in fact, you talked about that at the beginning with me. We talked about data and talked about, like, we have a sort of benchmark test you can take on our website, which basically you go along and you can rate your agency and it scores you and it tells you where you are. It does make me laugh because a lot of people go there and just give themselves top marks on everything. And they're like a very small one-man band agency. And I'm like, what? Anyway, but the importance of people being able to, go through these kind of online tests to actually better benchmark how they're doing and performing.
Yeah, so here's an interesting phenomenon. The US presidential elections signal what is going to happen in marketing in the next 10 years or 5 to 10 years. So, and I'm coming back to that idea.
No worries.
Right? Franklin Roosevelt, he does fireside chat radio, and then radio is the big thing, and it was print. And then JFK does a live televised debate, and he's in a dark suit. Nixon's in a light suit. Nixon's got a napkin and wiping his lip because of the hot lights. JFK knows not to do that. They see him on TV. He's more presidential. All the budgets move over to television because he wins on television, and then everyone goes television. Fast forward to Obama, social media marketing. He's engaging on social media. He's the social media president. And then what happens? All the budgets go whoosh, straight over to social media. It was the Obama 2008 campaign that moved social media from a kid's toy that no grown-ups would do to being, oh, wow, we need to get serious brands onto social media and doing all that. So US presidential elections, they tell you what's going to happen. 2016, Trump wins using hyper-targeted data, really just zoning in on like super little points of data. And one of the ways they started doing this was A, Facebook data, but B, in the Brexit campaign especially, they did short quizzes. And these quizzes, you go on the quizzes and you can win £1 million and all this sort of stuff if you complete the quiz. And you had no chance of ever doing that. But basically what they did is they benchmarked you against something called the ocean graph, openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, neuroticism. So you've got this kind of personality profiling. And then they could tell how you were going to vote based on your ocean score. And then they essentially marketed aggressively to people based on how they scored, and the very different marketing based on how people score. So what we know is that 2016 to 2020,
Katie's just throwing things over there.
She's like, what's on my score?
Sorry.
So here's what's happening. Trump in January did this strike on the Iranian general, and killed the guy, and then a week later ran 4,000 different ads, variations of ads across the entire electorate, asking people to fill in a quiz. How did you feel about that particular event? Did you think it was bold and decisive? Did you think it was reckless? Did you think it was like, how did you perceive that event? And what they were basically doing is, number one, running 4,000 variation of ads to learn about who clicks what and what types of people are clicking what. And then they're tracking everything. And when you filled in that scorecard, they're keeping that data to figure out what kind of person you are and how you vote, and whether you're, think of that as a decisive thing to do or a terrible thing to do. But they're going to remarket based on how you answered those scorecards. They've been doing this all year about everything. So is Biden, actually. Biden's campaign has gone crazy with quiz marketing. So what they're doing is they're just asking little yes-no questions, getting the quizzes, and then they feed back to you based upon those quizzes. So this is the big marketing trend for the next 5 years. Yes-no tests, survey questions that suck in all the data and then tell you stuff based on how you answered. So imagine, for example, I fill in a little quiz on BMW. Let's imagine this. I go to BMW's website. I say, which kind of BMW do you think is more you? Do you have a family? Do you have young kids? Do you have, do you go skiing, or do you go to the beach, and blah, 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 blah. Very rapidly, you only need to ask a few questions to realize that I'm not going to be a 2-seat sports car buyer for a long time, right? 3 kids under 6. So I'm going to be an X5,
Wow, you want to get out of lockdown, don't you, for sure?
Yeah. So, of course, I'm going to be a 5 to 7 seat car buyer for a long time. There's no point hitting me with ads for Z4s and all this sort of stuff. So the
no 2-seater Porsches for you. No.
Yeah. So the big trend, but mind you, there might be a fast forward moment where they actually literally tee up a statistical point where it's like, hey, your 3 kids are now over the age of 18. Why don't you come and buy a sports car you've always wanted, right? So they might play a long game. So the idea is data. It's all the presidential elections now. Have a look at who they're choosing, right? They're picking Biden because he's a blank slate. The reason they've chosen Biden is because he's malleable. He's whatever you want him to be, right? And what they're doing is they're just surrounding him with data, and they're just, to this group, they're going to say, oh, Biden's this, and to this group, they're going to say Biden's that, and he's enough of those things to essentially project onto him whatever you want, but they're just using the data to be able to say, this is, we tell you what you want to hear, tell you what you want to hear. Trump plays the exact same game, and Cambridge Analytica played that whole game. We'll tell you what you want to hear based upon the data. The biggest trend in brand and business and agency for the next 5 years is going to be quizzes and scorecards to capture information about you and then feeding back insights that are relevant. Did that answer that?
Yeah, no, it did totally. And I think, it does a couple of things as well. I think sometimes you can ask questions in a way to help prioritize people's problems and challenges, right? So I always remember in the Wolf of Wall Street book, which he spends half the book trying to validate. He has a book on sales, on how ethical his sales technique is. But he tells the story about when he was at Stratton Clare, I think it was, and we'll do this off the top of my head, but he was trying to sell the more expensive shares with his team of who always sold the dollar shares before. And they're selling the shares and no one was buying, and they were giving loads of objections. So they were writing down all the objections on the wall. And he realized it wasn't, the objections weren't objections. It was the fact that actually no one had a need to buy what they were selling or the stock they were selling. And so I think the good thing about sometimes when you're especially as a marketing business, when you're asking questions, you're able to ask questions in a way that you can actually highlight to people some of the weaknesses they have. Right now you might say in your questions things like, how strongly would you rate the technology in your business? And someone, have you got a technology roadmap for digital transformation? Yep. And someone says, well, no, I haven't. And they're like, shit, maybe I need one of those.
Yeah.
And it's like sometimes, and by the way, I try to be very ethical when I speak here because I'm not trying to manipulate, but sometimes people don't know what the problem is. Like, that saying is you don't know what you don't know. Course. So you're almost helping educate people at the same time as,
Hyper-targeting is actually the most ethical when done right.
Yeah.
Now, if you're using hyper-targeting to hack elections and to ruin democracy, that's probably not a good thing.
No. But actually getting relevancy in your adverts, I've always been a fan of that.
But if you're using hyper-targeting to talk to someone who's got 3 kids under 6 about BMW X5s as opposed to Z3s, Z4s, then that is actually...
It's annoying.
Yeah.
When it's wrong,
yeah,
it's
when
annoying,
it's wrong,
right?
it's like, sometimes you get those marketing pieces and you go, guys, have you not got any targeting going on whatsoever?
Yeah. But they're all in denial, aren't they? All of these channels that they're not listening, but the adverts that keep appearing every time. My wife's the favorite. She's like, I just mentioned like something really obscure.
Oh yeah, well,
and it's like, there's no way that wasn't audio.
Yeah,
no way.
Well,
and I'm talking like obscure things.
On a side note, the term listening, by legal definition, is that it's a human trait. Computers can't listen; they can monitor. Yeah. They can process.
Oh, well, there you go. That's what it is. So they're saying we're not listening.
Yeah. When they ask the question, they say, "Is anyone listening? Are you listening to people?" And they go, "No."
I need to get someone on the show who's a real expert in the area because I'm not an expert enough to know the technology and the laws around it.
But the lawyers advise these CEOs in advance, and they say if they ask you if you're listening, no. If they ask you if anyone's listening, no. If you ask you if Facebook's listening, no, because computers can't listen; they can only process or process.
Yeah, but the data points. I mean, during COVID, I've helped a lot of people who maybe have been made redundant and want to start an agency up, or I've helped a few people in the very early stages of their agency going, I've just started a business up. And I'm always like, it's the best time to start a business, right? And actually, I said this yesterday to someone, I think about 3 or 4 very specific data agencies have started, like 100% data. So I think, there's definitely a trend out there as well of more data businesses creeping up now.
Yeah, if I was in the agency business, it would be all data. It would be data and analytics and helping companies to collect more data. Essentially, without sounding terrible about it, it would be to essentially try and build a Cambridge Analytica for brands doing the right thing by consumers and brands, but actually crunching as much data as possible and doing hyper-targeted marketing. And really just, capturing the insights using scorecards, giving people back in relevant information based upon based upon
And that's
their data.
where you're investing your time and effort now.
I've invested into the technology behind that. So, I really believe that
I feel like if you've done that, it's quite a smart thing to do, bearing in mind you were 10 years ahead of everybody else and key people of influence.
Yeah, and there's a few. It's just the crystal ball for me on this one is U.S. presidential elections. You look at the reason I say that U.S. presidential elections, they're aggressive, high-stakes campaigns where winner takes all. So, of course, they're going to use every trick in the book, and of course, they're going to go to the cutting edge. Yeah. So it's always going to be the cutting-edge place to look at marketing trends. We're in an election year. This is every marketer's dream should be to pay close attention to how this campaign unfolds, because it's going to tell you what is the absolute Darwinian evolution approach to winning.
Your thing about the questions is, I watched. I'm pretty sure it's John Grisham, the judge, and it was weird last night with Mrs. G. I said, "Let's just watch a movie," and it came, and the judge came up, and I've not seen it before. Robert Downey Jr. So I watched it, and there's a scene in there where he has got to pick a jury, and so it's so relevant what you're saying, because he said, I'm looking for the people that believe in aliens, the people that believe UFOs. And he was picking all the people that are highly suggestible, where he knew he could switch them to believe a story. Yep. Yeah, and it's a very similar thing.
That's exactly what they did at Cambridge Analytica. They went looking for suggestible people, and they went looking for people to radicalize, and they had similar tests. That if you have certain beliefs and certain things that they can see on Facebook, then you're the ones who we can actually radicalize.
Yeah. Isn't it something, it takes, it used to be a stat, it's quite an old stat, it was something like once you've liked 90 things on Facebook, they've got you down 100%, or maybe it's less than 90.
The stat was 300 likes, they can predict your behavior better than your spouse.
Yeah.
So once you've liked 300 things, they've got you.
That's what it was. Yeah, 300. That's right. Yeah.
So one of the original
predicts you better than your spouse. Brilliant.
Yeah. One of the original pitches for Cambridge Analytica in the early days, when they went to the billionaires to get it funded, was to create an insane simulation of society based upon we can collect data from Facebook and we can simulate any scenario you want. We know how every single person in the society will behave. So if we have 90 million sim bots in the simulation, we can say, how would everyone behave during a pandemic? How would everyone behave during So literally, once you've liked 300 things, they can throw a scenario in, and they know that this many people are going to believe it's a conspiracy, this many people are going to blindly follow, this many people will obey government authority recommendations, this many people will do it just to be a rebel, they'll avoid it. So they know exactly out of the simulation how many people will do what. Yeah. And one of the original pitches was that we can simulate society at a granular level. We know who's going to win an election in advance.
I think we're all in a simulation anyway, aren't we?
Oh, well, Elon really believes that.
Well, I have to say, there is. I'm a massive fan of YouTube, and for those of you who are YouTube Premium users. And this isn't a plug because we're on YouTube and we're streaming it live, but actually it takes you down these rabbit holes.
Yeah.
And so like you just, and there's the guy in the States at the moment, I can't remember, but who is the leading authority on, basically, are we in a simulation? And when you hear him speak,
it's a great rabbit hole, right?
Yeah, it is a great rabbit. I mean, I to be fair, have really enjoyed my whole YouTube experience. Yeah. I can see why. Because it's funny, because you look at the different generations of. So I look at my daughter, who actually is the same age as Caitlin, and so they used to go to school together. And she, I don't know if she's the same with you, but she went on Facebook for the first time. She goes, I can't use it. She goes, how do you use this thing? I mean, actually, I left it for a story I can't say on YouTube because I had a horrible privacy story back in the day about Facebook. But the fact is, she grew up on Snapchat and Instagram. Mm-hmm. My son, however, he has sort of Snapchat, but actually YouTube. 15, he's all YouTube.
YouTube is actually also, for some reason, it's massively male. It's disproportionately male. YouTube is a male platform.
Yeah, because I know Joe. There's been a big scandal because Joe always said Joe Rogan's guests aren't many female guests on there and stuff. But you're right, on our stats for our show, it is actually hugely male.
YouTube's algorithms are essentially designed around radicalization, because whatever you start showing interest in, you radicalize on that. You go deeper, like essentially the down the rabbit hole is radicalization. You might start off watching a couple of videos, about baking, and suddenly you are getting deeper and deeper into the baking community, and you're now baking 24/7.
Yeah, don't go down the DMT route because Terence McKenna and ayahuasca, and then you go down this whole other level.
And you feel like you're so left out if you've not done a mushroom trip in the last 10 days.
It's fun. But actually, there's been a lot of huge historical, educational, and different perspectives. And again, I'm one of these people who often find myself in an echo chamber I don't belong in. Like I think on Facebook, I would always go, this isn't my echo chamber. I mean, politically, I think I'm a stereotypical something, but I'm really not. Like I'm not what people think I am.
Probably don't fit the mold. Yeah.
No. So we won't go into that. But I can't let you go without really talking to you about, because I'm probably the worst interviewer ever, because I haven't actually read 2 of your books. I feel like I should have read all of your books and prepared, but I haven't.
That would be very prepared.
But to be fair, I'm an audiobook person. They take freaking hours to go through. Can I just say actually that I think both of Oversubscribed to KPI, really well written. Like for an entrepreneur, they're easy to consume. I see a lot of people evangelize about your books, and we're lucky with Agencynomics. We get a lot of really positive chatter, and I think because it's quite simple, and I think actually the way you explain things is in a way that's very easy to consume and also to relate to your business. So I think that's a really big compliment, because there's a lot of books you get bored after one chapter, right? Whereas I finished both your books, and I would say probably 80% of books I read, I stop halfway.
I think the difference is I'm an entrepreneur first, running businesses. I've got businesses, and I'm trying to figure stuff out for myself. And I write about it second as a way to process. So I'm just fortunate that my processing strategy is to write books. So I kind of get it out of my head and document it.
So what should I read next? Entrepreneur Revolution or
well,
24 Assets?
Entrepreneur Revolution is very much for startups. It's designed for that person who wants the entrepreneur mindset, which you already have. It gives people 10 challenges to wake up their entrepreneur brain. It kind of explains how some of the stuff you learn in school is counterproductive to entrepreneurship, such as paying people to do your homework.
Is that why I failed school?
Yeah, well, it could be, right? Because, like just a basic thing like getting the smart kid to do your homework for you is a really good thing in life. That's a great thing. That's called attracting talent, and having the right compensation. So
I know so many people that's done that, by the way.
Of course, entrepreneurs, to most entrepreneurs, that is the most logical thing in the world. It's like, but they're really smart at maths. Why wouldn't I just leverage that? So it talks about that, and it talks about setting up, and talks about my story, and it talks about some of the mindsets and some of the products, how to create your first product and launch your first product. So that's very much Entrepreneur Revolution is welcome to the party.
So what about people? Because sometimes people, I think there's always. You probably know more about this than me, but I think there's almost 2 types of entrepreneur as well. Because when you sell a business, like when I sold my business, I call it a curse being an entrepreneur, because I have an idea every day, right? And I have to manage that carefully because, I wanted to be the Jerry Maguire of influencers in 2007. I saw, the YouTubers and being the next big thing to manage, almost like sports stars. But I think, so I lost my train of thought now because I started thinking about
the 2 types of entrepreneurs.
2 types of entrepreneur, thank you. So there are some who are like serial, who can do more things again and again. But then sometimes people, so is it the lady who did Coffee Nation, she sold to Costa Coffee.
Yep.
That, and she was, I can't remember her name. And I heard her speak once, fantastic story, where she was a lawyer and she went to America and she saw a coffee shop and she said, we're drinking out of polystyrene cups.
Yeah.
And she's like, and she literally took photographs and she came back and she recreated, like the first Coffee Nation is identical to a New York coffee shop.
Amazing.
No imagination, but she was a lawyer. She wasn't an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
So she replicated and it was a massive success, sold for millions.
Yeah.
So some people are serial, some people aren't. So I guess if someone's not a serial entrepreneur and they're starting again, that could be a really good book to go to maybe.
Just get them a little bit more entrepreneurial, And it's kind of, there are levels, right? So there's a level of entrepreneur who sets up a business and works in it every day. And there's a level of entrepreneur who kind of goes past that and says, I don't need to work in the business. I can just own the business and have multiple businesses. So I now have multiple businesses. Yeah. I've gotten to the point of buying companies. So I actually you have an idea every day to start a business, and then you get to this point of like, oh, I want to buy a business every day. I want to go and buy these businesses and grow them. And it's that same kind of like compulsive. I've got to be careful not to accidentally buy something.
Yeah.
So there's different kind of things that you kind of levels you go through as the entrepreneurial journey unfolds. So it is waking up that entrepreneurial mindset. 24 assets is a process that I went through when I needed to formalize the assets in my business. I needed the business to have a life beyond me. I needed it to stand on its own 2 feet.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, so that's definitely the book for me next.
And it was exhausting, right? So I'm thinking, what are all the things that I have to put in place to build a business that really stands on its own feet and runs when I'm not there? And the reason for that is I was operating between London and Melbourne. At one point, I was doing Melbourne, Sydney, London, and I was kind of like plate spinning, where I'd kind of turn up in London and get things going, and then I'd off to Melbourne to get things going. And I needed to really think through what needs to be in place for this business to just be a business and exist. And I knew that if you're an investor, you own houses or you own stocks and shares and bonds, and those are assets that perform whether you're there or not. And they just, a house is just valuable whether you're in Melbourne or in London. So I kind of thought, okay, I need assets. Income follows assets. So I've got to get these assets created. So I catalogued it and made a list of all the different things that we could put into the business to formalize those as assets. So things like formalizing the intellectual property, creating a brand guidelines, which most people would know about, having a way of formalizing culture, having data protection, having there's 24 things. And once you formalize them, they become assets. And what I realized in writing 24 assets is there's actually 24 major ones. And when you get on with putting something in place in each of those 24 categories, the business just exists and it's its own thing. And if those assets are mostly digital, it scales. So it's essentially 24 assets is...
And that's important for people like me because, like when you oversubscribed, where you say the great question where you say, how many clients can you actually take? Because you can't have unlimited clients, right? No one can deal with unlimited anything.
Well, if you can, then the price falls to zero.
Yeah.
Like Google can have unlimited searches and the cost of a search is nothing.
Yeah, exactly. So so for me, it's like, I only have 12 main clients, and I'm lucky that maybe every year, maybe someone sells or merges or something. So a space opens up. I have a few other tactical days through the year, but I can't really do much more than that. But yet I've probably got 200 amazing pieces of training content, in my head that actually it's unfair that other people can't get access to that information. So we write a book, but the problem is books, as you can't say everything. You can only read, we did an Agencynomics covered. You've been very good because you probably focus on sort of very niche areas, whereas I was kind of blanket covered loads of topics. But I think it's an area for me next to start looking at the asset. And I think a lot of agencies, they do create some really good assets. So, for example, a lot of them...
Well, they create assets for others really well.
Yeah, but also that sometimes they do, they do their own creative projects in-house and actually, or they do their own technical projects in-house and they're assets, right?
Yes, yeah, they are.
Some of the biggest problems have sometimes come where they then try and change their model to sort of do too many things. I find I know you just said then that you can work... you could do multiple businesses. I think you're at a size now, probably with the right structures in all of your businesses to be able to be fully removed to do that. But sometimes I find that businesses start to dilute if they dilute their focus, because there's only 100 hours in a week, right, for most entrepreneurs. So actually, if they suddenly spend 25 areas in 4 different areas, they get 4 average businesses, not one truly great business. But there's got to be, I'm sure there's smarter ways in your book on how they can monetize it, identify those assets.
Yes. Well, half the battle is knowing what each asset would look like as a really world-class asset, and then just we get people to do a heat map of green, yellow, red, so traffic lights, and then we go through the 24 assets in the book, and we just say, okay, that's either a red, a yellow, or a green. Green is it's great, it's functioning, it stands on its own feet. It's, people would license it. Yellow is we've got something there, but we haven't formalized it. Red is we're really not doing anything there. So it's very much, whereas oversubscribed is getting excess demand beyond capacity, 24 assets is increasing capacity.
Okay, amazing. That's great. Look, I'm actually really excited, and you've very kindly brought along a couple of books. He's actually got 3 books, but Andy here, who is a massive fan, is going to get one of the 3 books. He can't be here today. He's on a drive down on holiday somewhere in Exeter. So, but we've got 2 copies of Oversubscribed. Have you signed them? Can you?
Yeah, I can sign them.
Brilliant.
Absolutely, yeah.
So we've got 2 copies to give away. Did we get any questions in today?
No questions, just comments.
Just comments. Okay, maybe what we'll do is we'll give it to anyone who left the first 2 comments that were made. I will track them down and give them a copy of the book. So, Daniel, thank you. That's been amazing. I've really enjoyed talking to you.
My pleasure. I hope the comments are positive. Are they?
Yeah. What do people say?
We have from Antio. He said.
From who? Sorry.
Antonio Falco.
Oh, Antonio. Yeah. Hi, Antonio.
I agree with your guess. 20%, 5 times, not 3. If you have a process where you can have your sales cycle mapped out, you take the guesswork out of the conversation rate. The sales cycle must have a percentage value for each step of the process.
There we go.
Yeah, he's a pro sales guy. That's why.
There you go.
From Stephen, he said, this podcast series is great. Learn lots and for free. I'm guessing Spencer's talking about Tottenham.
Oh, yeah. I try not to name people, but yeah, it was Tottenham.
And Ryan O'Keefe said brilliant.
Oh, Ryan O'Keefe's a big fan.
Nice.
So let me tell you about Ryan quickly. So Ryan sent me a message yesterday. He's just been in Ireland with his family. He managed to get away. He's had a son who's been pretty sick recently. Very brave young boy. Anyway, they went to Ireland on holiday, and he basically made his whole family listen to your book on the drive back from Ireland. I was like, so his wife and kids are also now fans of yours as well. It's quite funny. So so thank you, Ryan. So look, thank you very much, Daniel. I really appreciate you taking your time to come and see us in this kind of strange apocalyptic world.
Wonderful to go.
We're in a multi-million-pound business, and it's completely scarce and empty in here. So, but no, I really appreciate taking the time. Wonderful books, and as I said, I know that most of the agency community I'm in are massive fans. I said just to close off, I said someone said the other day, if you started an agency tomorrow, what are the 3 things you would do? And I said I would read Daniel Priestley's Key Person of Influence. I would get LinkedIn training, and I would get someone like actually Ryan from Jago or Ash Jones to define my personal brand, because I think those 3 things would hopefully put me in a way where I could communicate my point of view and hopefully become an expert in a sector where I could add value to brands. So it's been great. So listen, thank you everyone for listening. Hope you've enjoyed the episode.
Thanks for having me on.
Oh, no, it's our pleasure. And hope you enjoyed the episode. Please, as always, can you subscribe? Hit the subscribe button. And thank you very much, and we'll see you soon. I've got work.